How's it going, folks? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. Well, last week, a Texas family saw a huge victory over fracking. The Parr family was just awarded $3 million after they were afflicted with illnesses caused by a fracking operation taking place on the outskirts of their ranch. According to Lisa Parr, the family experienced, quote, nosebleeds, vision problems, nausea, rashes, and blood pressure issues. Now, considering how the fracking industry has denied such problems are caused by the practice, this case is a landmark decision and a huge win for fracking opponents. However, it seems clear that the family has already been so severely damaged by the drilling operation that a monetary settlement seems too little too late. And considering that fracking injects over 700 chemicals into the earth, including known carcinogens, there's no way to know how exposure to these wells will affect the Parrs later on in their lives, or, for that matter, anyone else who lives near fracking wells. So, if you believe that the real victory will come when families aren't getting nosebleeds due to the exposure to fracking chemicals in the first place, then join me and let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire was told. These words are hard hitting, you watching your neck, but you need to tune in because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
How often do you travel by air to see your friends and family? Once a year, once a month, every week? Well, can you imagine if one day you tried to board a plane to see your dying grandmother or your wife, only to find out that you've been placed on a no-fly list? It's exactly the case for 4 American Muslim men, all of whom have been banned from air travel after being flagged by U.S. intelligence. Why were they flagged, you might ask? Well, considering how they have no criminal record, they're alleging a reason that's far more insidious than even being profiled. In an unprecedented lawsuit against the U.S. government, these 4 men are claiming that they were placed on the no-fly list by the FBI as a punishment because they refused to become informants for the agency. Yep, spy on your neighbors on behalf of the FBI or never see your family again. Sounds fair, right? Well, one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, Awais Sajjad, found out that he had been on the list for 2 years after attempting to fly to Pakistan to visit his dying 93-year-old grandmother. According to Sajjad, after he inquired about why he was on the list, he was approached by FBI agents who interrogated him and then asked him to work for them as an informant. In an interview with Ars Technica, Sajjad asks, quote, "I do not want to become an informant, but the government says that I must be in order to be taken off the no-fly list. How can the government tell me that the only way I can see my family again is if I turn my back on my community?" His story is sadly echoed by the 3 other plaintiffs. Naveed Shinwari, who hasn't seen his wife in 2 years because he hasn't been able to travel to his home country of Afghanistan. Here he is describing what the experience has been like for him.
It's very frustrating, and you feel helpless. No one will tell you how you can get off of it, how you got on it. And it has a profound impact on people's lives, and it have had a big impact on my life and on my family. And so this is one of the reasons that I wanted to come out, was that there might be a lot of people that are afraid to speak up.
Well, this lawsuit was the last resort for these people. In fact, they've been trying to clear their names for well over a year to no avail. And the FBI has declined consistently all of their requests. And tragically, their case is far from unique. According to the U.S. government's own estimates, there's already 20,000 people on the no-fly list, and it's growing by the day. In fact, this same lawsuit alleges that the FBI places thousands of individuals with no criminal records on the list as a way to intimidate them into serving as moles. Because I guess in the self-fulfilling war on terror, if you can't beat the bad guys, force the innocent ones to join you. In the 21st century, fewer decisions are harder for new parents than whether or not to circumcise their son. Yes, male circumcision as a practice has been around for over a millennia, rooted in ancient religion and custom. But any practice or procedure that's been practiced for thousands of years should raise questions over whether place it has in modern society. Because of people's various upbringings, religious backgrounds, and manhood, this topic continues to stir up controversy and debate everywhere. Nonetheless, it's a conversation that needs to be had. Personally, as a female, I never gave male circumcision a second thought. So I decided to speak with Georgianne Chapin of Intact America to hear her side of the story. I first asked her when circumcision jumped from being a religious to a mainstream surgical procedure.
Most Americans do not understand that circumcision was started in the 19th century at a time when the most horrible thing to do was to masturbate. And circumcision was posed by Victorian doctors in England and America as a way to stop boys from pleasuring themselves. It was also promoted to cure all kinds of maladies, and you're going to laugh, but this is all extremely well documented in the literature. Circumcision was claimed to prevent tuberculosis or to cure it, to prevent insanity or to cure it, to prevent or cure hip dysplasia, to fix crossed eyes, of course to prevent venereal disease. That claim has recurred over the years. And then finally it was kind of bought into as a way, of keeping boys clean, as they put it. And that was really a function of the fact that in the early 20th century, populations immigrating from Southern Europe were, the men tended to be intact, and they were poor people living in poor areas, in urban areas of the country. So being circumcised was associated with poverty, and being intact was associated with poverty, and being circumcised was associated with people who were affluent enough to have their babies in the hospitals, where doctors would immediately cut off the evil foreskin from these poor newborn babies. So it really became entrenched as a medical procedure during a time of extreme ignorance about bodily functions and the causes of various illnesses. And then it became a routine obstetrical intervention and ultimately a great moneymaker for the American medical profession.
Let's talk about the arguments that are maintained to support circumcision, Georgianne, like hygiene and disease prevention.
Well, there's never been any proof at all that circumcision prevents any diseases. The latest claim, of course, for HIV is completely bogus. American cemeteries are full of circumcised boys and men who died from AIDS. Cutting off a body part, a healthy, normal body part, doesn't prevent you from getting any kind of sexually transmitted disease. The hygiene argument is also bogus. Number one, unwashed body parts have never been proven to threaten the world order or to cause disease in and of themselves. It's pretty much somebody's own personal preference as to how much or how little they wash. We also learn to keep all kinds of other body parts clean. So we learn to brush our teeth and to wash our backsides when we go to the bathroom. And why this frontal part of a man's anatomy is supposed to be so unbelievably threatening and so dirty is really kind of mystifying when you think about it. Women's genitals are just as complicated as men's and just as difficult to wash, and there's no big push in the United States for shaving down women's genitals as a way of...
Let's talk about the arguments, of course, against circumcision. I think the main one is the loss of sensitivity in a male's penis. Has this been proven?
Sure, it has. And you really, you know, if you told me there are no studies done about what cutting off people's fingertips, whether that's proven that they lose sensitivity, I would say, do you really need to do a study that cutting off the most sensitive part of your fingers makes you lose sensitivity? Of course you do. Cutting off the most sensitive part of a man's penis, of course it reduces sensitivity. The arguments that say that it does not affect men's sensitivity go against, of course, the very reason why circumcision was promoted. From Maimonides, a Jewish philosopher from the 12th century, I'm sorry, promoted circumcision, said that circumcision was in fact a good thing because it kept men and women from focusing so much on pleasure. In the 19th century, they cut off boys' foreskins in order to reduce the pleasure from masturbation. So of course it reduces sensitivity. But even if it didn't, and even if it did prevent to some degree or reduce certain diseases that a boy or a man could get later in life, none of that is a justification for strapping down a healthy, normal, newborn child and cutting off part of his body.
I mean, no medical institution in the developed world actually endorses circumcision, as far as I know.
That's correct.
In most countries, children are not circumcised. Why do doctors still suggest it to American parents? Or do they?
I think they're too. Yes, too many of them do. I think there's several reasons. One is it's a terrible thing people don't like to admit that what they've been doing for so long is a really bad thing. The second thing is many doctors, most American doctors at this time were probably circumcised themselves as children, and it's hard for them to think that maybe that was something that was not only unnecessary but bad. And a third reason is that in the U.S., doctors make, the more procedures that they do, the more money they make. So circumcision has become a time-honored way for obstetricians and other doctors, pediatricians, to make money. Hospitals make money off of it. Doctors make money off of it. Medical supply industry makes money off of it. And now there's a cosmetic industry that takes stolen foreskins, because they are stolen from their rightful owners, and makes anti-wrinkle cream and other cosmetic products out of it. So it is an industry for sure. And baby boys are paying the price every day. And American men are paying the price as they get older and they are living with only a part of their natural anatomy.
Horrifying statement there. I didn't realize that they're actually using the foreskin for cosmetic reasons. Georgianne, a really barbaric practice. It's time that it, more knowledge is told about it. Thank you so much, Georgianne Chapin, Executive Director, Intact America. Next up, I'll tell you what's been going on in the world while the world's been focused on Cliven Bundy. Stick around.
12 hours of talking about the same story doesn't make it news. No softball interviews, no puff pieces, only tough questions right here.
Well, folks, if you haven't been watching the corporate media for the last month, let me fill you in on what you've missed. That lost Malaysian airliner still lost, Avril Lavigne still irrelevant, and her new video sucks. And yes, Cliven Bundy, a rancher from Nevada who lives out in the middle of nowhere and has probably never seen a black person, is ignorant. But that didn't stop the race-baiting mainstream media from turning the entire Bundy Ranch situation into a left versus right sideshow.
Breaking tonight, we just received video from a press conference on a new firestorm involving Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy.
Why did they show up with all those agents? Why did they show up with all those firearms and so much firepower? Well, maybe they knew a little bit more about this guy than Sean Hannity.
Mr. Bundy, I see in your arms that you are holding a dead calf. What happened?
I want to talk to you about being prejudiced a little bit.
And you haven't asked me that question this morning.
Well, it's because you
why.
held up a dead cat. You wonder if Negroes weren't better off as slaves. Now, are you a racist?
Yes, the corporate media spent the better part of last week latching on to Cliven Bundy's ignorant remarks, leaping on the opportunity to make fun of Fox News and anyone who had criticized the Bureau of Land Management as being racist by proxy. And of course, what this did was little more than highlight the media's own bias when it comes to what's truly worth covering. So what did we all miss? Well, the focus was on Bundy's views about welfare. For starters, 55 people were assassinated by drone in Yemen over Easter weekend. But don't worry, according to officials, they were all terrorists and didn't deserve a right to defend themselves. Nothing to see here. And then there's the horrifying tragedy that just took place in Nigeria, where 230 young schoolgirls were loaded into vehicles at gunpoint by al-Qaeda-linked militant group Boko Haram in the middle of the night. This isn't the first time the group has targeted Nigeria's youth. According to Human Rights Watch, Boko Haram routinely attacks schools and actively recruits children. And this particular group has a disturbing history of abducting young girls and women to be kept as wives and servants for its members. So, in the wake of the brutal terrorist attacks that took place in the country earlier this month, killing at least 75 people, and now this latest act of violence against helpless schoolgirls, one might wonder why Nigeria is missing on the MSM. But it's not just countries in Africa that are being ignored. Meanwhile, back in the States, the Federal Communications Commission officially killed net neutrality, finally making it easier for corporations to control what you have access to on the internet. That's right, the FCC announced new regulations last week implementing a pay-to-play, two-tiered internet, which allows giant companies to make deals with ISPs so that their content is streamed faster. According to the Huffington Post, the laws, quote, create two lanes on the internet, fast super highways that big tech companies can afford, and a bumpy back road where less fortunate websites dwell. And what a shock. The corporate-controlled media, owned by just a few massive corporations that have cut deals with cable providers, doesn't seem to think the internet monopolies and the death of the neutral internet is worth covering. I wonder why. Because really, in the grand scheme of things, it's easier to talk about conspiracy theories regarding a missing airliner than to talk about the actual corporate conspiracy that has taken away our internet freedom. And to that end, what's more racist? Cliven Bundy's remarks or the massacre of 55 Yemenis with zero trial and no due process just because they might be brown and of military age? You tell me. Many of you may remember the viral video campaign Coney 2012. Yes, the poster with Democrats and Republicans and a peace dove on the one thing we can all unite on. Well, it turns out that when everything was said and done, the one thing that was agreed upon was that this video was little more than a promotional stunt for the organization that made it, full of exaggerated claims and misguided efforts. However, even 2 years later, Obama is still sending U.S. troops to aid the effort to hunt down notorious war criminal Joseph Kony. This, in addition to the hundreds of millions of dollars the U.S. government gives the Ugandan government every year. But if you think that financially backing a brutal regime to hunt down a warlord is counterintuitive, these types of operations under the guise of humanitarianism are par for the course in Africa. Luckily, my next guest is able to give a different side of the story. Her name is Jane Bussmann. She's a former Hollywood comedian who went to Uganda to hunt for Joseph Kony years before the Kony campaign existed. And since then, she's been on a mission to tell the truth with a style of writing that's been referred to as agony comedy. Bussmann is also the author of the book A Journey to the Dark Heart of Nameless, Unspeakable Evil. She joined me earlier and I first asked her why she first decided to go to Uganda.
It made pretty clear to me straight away how competitive the youthful industry is, and I didn't have a single qualification beyond sort of high school art. So I thought, all I can do is write about stuff. I know, I'll write about Joseph Kony, the story, and I ended up sort of blundering there, write about the story, but also to try and get a date with this hot guy, John Prendergast, this peacemaker. But I sort of didn't tell him any of this, so he quite naturally left by the time I got there. So I'm now stuck in Uganda for 6 weeks, and there was nothing to do waiting for this guy because he wasn't going to answer any love letters. So I just basically investigated the Joseph Kony story, and because I had no money and I was sort of living on the ground, the story that I came across was a way different story from what I would have got if I'd been a real foreign correspondent with somewhere to stay and money to live.
Right, right.
So,
well, you said that you kind of found out about Joseph Kony. You Googled who's the most evil person in the world. I mean, Bush, Dick Cheney, their offices are right here. Why go all the way to Uganda when you could have just confronted Kissinger?
Well, they didn't look like Dave Chappelle as Rick James, like Kony did. And it wasn't such an obviously baffling story. I just thought, you had 2 million people in northern Uganda, hiding from one man and a bunch of kids. It always smelled a bit fishy to me, and also because, as I say, the hot guy was there. And as I said, when I got there, the story was so unbelievably different. It really was a war that people were keeping going because it was making them so much money. And the idea that the people who were the currency was refugees and children was something that was totally new to me. I'd learnt, what I knew from television news, and I thought a refugee was someone you instinctively helped no matter what. I had no idea that they were a cash cow until I found myself, in a refugee camp. So.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because I think people just know Kony from this absurdly viral Kony 2012 video that actually came out years after you published this book.
Yeah.
Jane, talk about the story that you kind of encountered once you were on the ground that was different than what you'd learned.
The first thing that started happening to me was meeting people who, I was all sort of like, oh, isn't it awful, Joseph Kony, magic powers, no one's ever going to stop him. And they said, well, funnily enough, we had a chance to stop him, and they'd all have a variation on the same story. We called the army when we saw Joseph Kony's men coming to kidnap our kids. The army didn't come. The most famous story is the St. Mary's school kidnapping, in which 139 schoolgirls were taken in the middle of the night by Joseph Kony's men. And you think, oh, a random kidnapping, how awful. Spirited the girls away, nobody knew where they went. That was completely not the case. The girls knew they were coming. The army had been seen on their way. The LRA had been seen walking towards the school. The Sister Rakele, the deputy headmistress, went to 3 separate Ugandan army bases that night, begging for them to come and protect her girls. Nobody came. Even when they asked her to, she asked them, should I close the school? They said, no, leave it open. Why? The whole thing is really, really fishy. It was known for, a long time that was going to happen. President Museveni had been to the school before because girls had been taken and kidnapped before. One girl never found again. And yet when the Ugandan army had the chance to stop Joseph Kony, a really big high-profile case, didn't turn up. The Nun rescued 109 girls. The army rescued, the 40,000-strong army, fully equipped, only managed to rescue 1. As I said in the book, Nun 109, army 1. Hillary Clinton said of this case, oh, there were no easy answers. Well, excuse me, I would not sit next to Hillary Clinton in maths. Ridiculous.
Well, why? I mean, why would they let all these people go? I mean, what was the Ugandan army getting out of keeping Joseph Kony have this kind of child army maintained?
Foreign aid. I went to look in this refugee camp. I saw starving people. I've been told this refugee camp was a protected village, protected by the entire aid industry, protected by the Ugandan government. The week I was there, 7 girls were picked off by Joseph Kony's men. And, yet a man from the British government turns up, sees the refugees. What does he say? Does he say, oh, well, let's get them out of this camp. Let's find Joseph Kony. No. He says, I'm going to give you, the government, £700 million in foreign aid, a fat chunk of which goes directly to the government. Now, the World Food Programme at the time were asking for another 60 million, to feed these people, hungry people, because they'd fled Joseph Kony into the camp. But that was a lie, because charities often lie in press releases, and it gets reported as fact. What had actually happened was that the majority of those people had been driven into these camps off fertile farms that, of course, they wouldn't all want to leave. That's their food, that's their land. They were driven in by their own government at gunpoint, a military exercise, and kept there at gunpoint. If you then give, a fat chunk of, hundreds of millions in aid to the people that drove them in there, is it any wonder they're there 10 years later? Refugees are money, pure and simple.
And I will say that the State Department gives Uganda $456 million annually. That was just this year's amount in foreign aid to Uganda.
And they will say, but that 400,000 of that goes towards healthcare. Well, you think, okay, well that's because the Ugandan government can't afford to do that. That's very nice. But what can the Ugandan government afford to do with the money we've saved them by paying their medical bill? They buy a $750 trillion jet. they buy weapons with which they suppress their civilian population. How can a Ugandan vote out, a bent president if we keeping him in aid, keeping him in power with, enough money to buy the weapons that he suppresses you?
Right, just throwing this money at kind of warlords in Africa and these brutal regimes. I mean, and expecting those to be filtered down to the public is just outrageous. Jane, I can't even imagine what you thought when you saw the Kony 2012 viral video after you had already written the book and kind of already cutting through the heart of the story, and then seeing these guys, obviously this Christian organization, saying it's all about Kony, not even pointing out the kind of the criminal enterprise going on with the Ugandan military.
Yeah, well, it might surprise people, but to be honest, my first thought was, good God, Joseph Kony on the telly. I mean, until Kony 2012, the only people that would run my story back in the day was the travel pages of the Mail on Sunday, because the kids being kidnapped were black. And I promise you, the Mail on Sunday, this is a newspaper so right of centre, their inaugural headline was probably black people. Whose fault are they? But after Kony 2012, every man and his dog who had even flown over Uganda on an internal flight was getting called up to talk about it. And everyone just sort of thought, it turned into the People's Front of Judea from Monty Python. Everyone's saying, no, they're CIA, so we can't talk about this. CIA. Don't talk about the messenger. Talk about Joseph Kony, the kidnapping, excuse me. And everyone sort of, it was like the most ridiculous Monty Python sketch I've ever been in. Plus, he made masturbating in public cool. And who has done that since Michael Jackson, So I say fair play.
Unbelievable. Talk about your apron. You've been in Kenya.
Yes.
Now you're working kind of working to kind of report on the aid organizations there. What is this all about?
Mickey, I'm just doing nothing. What's this? This is my. When you pick up a souvenir on your travels.
Right.
Well, I was in the Congo researching a comedy drama about charities. And I was taken to, obviously concerned about rape in the Congo. This is the trendy new thing, ask Ben Affleck. So I went to, this place called Heal Africa. This is the rape mothership. This is where Hillary Clinton goes to see the rape. And the priest took me to the gift shop. Workshop. And he's saying, so we've got so many problems here, 17,000 rape victims. In his workshop, he was solving the problem of the rape by having the rape victims make aprons. So things Africa needs, number one, aprons. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but the fabric they gave the rape victims of the Congo to make this apron is covered in pictures of semi-naked women serving beer. I mean,
wow.
You cannot make this up. And that's what they don't like to tell you, the poverty industry. The rapists running around in the Congo are a huge, messy, ugly war militia that was fed, watered by the aid industry. After the Rwanda genocide, 2 million refugees turned up over the border in the Congo, Burundi. What did the aid industry do? Fed them, watered them, got them back on their feet without saying, excuse me, who are you? They were the Hutu genocidaire. They were 250,000 axe murderers walking the refugees like hostages. The charities, for 2 years, they were even giving them pubs and cinemas. They paid them in cash. They let them run the camps themselves.
Thank you so much, Jane Busman. A journey to the dark heart of nameless, unspeakable evil. Really appreciate you coming on.
Buy the book. Thank you.
That's our show, you guys. Join me again tomorrow when I break the set all over again.
Yeah, I take your prisoners, you call it aggressive, but all I see is lies coming out in your message. I keep it on days and set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
How often do you travel by air to see your friends and family? Once a year, once a month, every week? Well, can you imagine if one day you tried to board a plane to see your dying grandmother or your wife, only to find out that you've been placed on a no-fly list? It's exactly the case for 4 American Muslim men, all of whom have been banned from air travel after being flagged by U.S. intelligence. Why were they flagged, you might ask? Well, considering how they have no criminal record, they're alleging a reason that's far more insidious than even being profiled. In an unprecedented lawsuit against the U.S. government, these 4 men are claiming that they were placed on the no-fly list by the FBI as a punishment because they refused to become informants for the agency. Yep, spy on your neighbors on behalf of the FBI or never see your family again. Sounds fair, right? Well, one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, Wais Sajjad, found out that he had been on the list for 2 years after attempting to fly to Pakistan to visit his dying 93-year-old grandmother. According to Sajjad, after he inquired about why he was on the list, he was approached by FBI agents who interrogated him and then asked him to work for them as an informant. In an interview with Ars Technica, Sajjad asks, quote, "I do not want to become an informant, but the government says that I must be in order to be taken off the no-fly list. How can the government tell me that the only way I can see my family again is if I turn my back on my community. His story is sadly echoed by the three other plaintiffs. Naveed Shinwari, who hasn't seen his wife in 2 years because he hasn't been able to travel to his home country of Afghanistan. Here he is describing what the experience has been like for him.
It's very frustrating, and you feel helpless. No one will tell you how you can get off of it, how you got on it. And it
How's it going, folks? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. Well, last week, a Texas family saw a huge victory over fracking. The Parr family was just awarded $3 million after they were afflicted with illnesses caused by a fracking operation taking place on the outskirts of their ranch. According to Lisa Parr, the family experienced, quote, nosebleeds, vision problems, nausea, rashes, and blood pressure issues. Now, considering how the fracking industry has denied such problems are caused by the practice, this case is a landmark decision and a huge win for fracking opponents. However, it seems clear that the family has already been so severely damaged by the drilling operation that a monetary settlement seems too little too late. And considering that fracking injects over 700 chemicals into the earth, including known carcinogens, there's no way to know how exposure to these wells will affect the Parrs later on in their lives, or, for that matter, anyone else who lives near fracking wells. So, if you believe that the real victory will come when families aren't getting nosebleeds due to the exposure to fracking chemicals in the first place, then join me and let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air that's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait, do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire was told. He's working hard hitting, you watching the net, but you need to tune in because we're breaking.
It has a profound impact on people's lives, and it have had a big impact on my life and on my family. And so this is one of the reasons that I wanted to come out, was that there might be a lot of people that are afraid to speak up.
Well, this lawsuit was the last resort for these people. In fact, they've been trying to clear their names for well over a year to no avail. And the FBI has declined consistently all of their requests. And tragically, their case is far from unique. According to the U.S. government's own estimates, there's already 20,000 people on the no-fly list, and it's growing by the day. In fact, this same lawsuit alleges that the FBI places thousands of individuals with no criminal records on the list as a way to intimidate them into serving as moles. Because I guess in the self-fulfilling war on terror, if you can't beat the bad guys, force the innocent ones to join.